if we could now take seats for the last session of the day before our co-chairs concludes the summit. So there has been a lot of mention of the importance of the regulatory approaches over the 3 days. So Florence, we've been waiting for your talk anxiously, and I'm very delighted to welcome you to the Global Summit for Precision Psychiatry. Florence BUTLEN, who is also a clinical psychiatrist herself. She doesn't need introduction, but Henry Kissinger once said, "Well, I don't need an introduction, but I enjoy having one anyway." So in that spirit, Florence is really an anchor for psychiatric disorders at the European Medicines Agency, working at the Office for Neurological and Psychiatric Disorders, and we're delighted that she will share with us today remarks on the dimensional approach for psychiatric disorders. Florence, please.
Thank you. So thank you very much for this very nice introduction, and thank you obviously for the invitation today. It's been a very interesting meeting. I hope you like also this presentation. So indeed, I work at EMA. So I'm a clinical psychiatrist, and I work in the Office for Therapies for Neurological and Psychiatric Disorders. So next. Okay. So I have a disclaimer to make, because as an EMA staff member, please don't quote everything I'm saying here. It's more like on my personal, opinion, and it's not in any way a clear position from EMA or scientific committee. It's really to continue the discussion and give the perspective from European regulatory viewpoint. So in brief outline, so what I would like to present today is, first of all, to set a bit the scene. So we know that there are many challenges, of course, in drug development in psychiatry. We have not seen so many new treatments coming, for sure. And that's something also that is of concern, obviously, for us, because it's not so nice, to be seated in your office and not receiving, exciting application as in other therapeutic fields. And the challenges we have seen recently with a new approach that we welcome, but still we have a concern, and we see potential difficulties in terms of implementation from the regulatory side. It's, as you know, this dimensional approach and a different way of diagnosing and investigating and the effect of a drug in a certain population. Still, we have tried to emphasize this approach and this new way of diagnosing and also investigating treatment in our guidelines. So I will also touch upon that. And to finish, I would like to really encourage you strongly to come discuss, and we have a number of tools and platforms at EMA. And the earlier, the better, because as we have seen, it's a very complicated field. It's not easy, and no one has the solution. Otherwise, we would know. So dialogue, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and early engagement are really key. So to start with, so we all know there is a huge unmet medical need, which has clearly been shown again. With the pandemic, at least it has put the light on those problems, and now there is, as we have heard yesterday, more and more political will to help, which is very good and very important, as clearly, despite a much better understanding of the pathophysiology of the disorders, we are still struggling to translate all of these advances into better treatment, so better, safer, more personalized treatment, faster as well. We've seen recently, drugs coming with a faster onset of action, and one has been authorized, as you know, in the EU and in the States. But we are still lacking a lot of treatment within our therapeutic arsenal. So we have a way to improve patients, but we all know that there are quite often a variability. It's difficult to know who is going to respond, and there is also a lot of partial responders. Difficult also to predict who is going to respond only partially, and residual symptoms are something that we try to target as well by adding sometimes another treatment. So we will have this long list of treatments on the prescription sheet, and polytherapy is not something satisfying, no, for the psychiatrist or the patient, obviously. Leads to many side effects, stigmatization of the patient because also of the difficulties to go back to work. The side effects are often visible as well. So we really need to find a way to move forward. So the shortcoming in the classification system, that's something that obviously has come to our attention as well with the revision of the DSM in particular, trying to approach those disorders in a different manner, try to profile the patients more, and obviously keep up with more precise and more narrow drug development on a specific population. It's not easy because the population is very heterogeneous. So clinically, we see that in the practice, but biologically, genetically. So how to define really the population? Do we have the right tool to do that? We are heard a lot about the lack of biomarkers. This is definitely something that slows down the innovation, but does that mean that we need to wait for the biomarker, for the science to be able to, and the industry to produce those biomarkers to really make the field move forward? So that's a question, or so we need to ask, because patients are there, they're waiting. So we need to find a way to develop treatments that are working and are safer. With or without biomarker, it's not a discussion that is going to have an easy solution, but it's a question that it's worth putting on the table. Yeah. So, well, long time ago now, so 10 years ago, actually, when the DSM-5 was under revision, we took like a proactive approach. We decided to have a meeting. It was still in London back then, and this meeting tried to gather experts from Europe, but also from the States with the DSM-5 task force and the WHO. And we really tried to understand what was exactly this dimensional approach about, what was the added value on top of the categorical diagnostic criteria that we know about, and how to integrate that into our regulatory framework, because it's kind of a big change and not that easy. So few questions came up, and we tried to summarize that in a publication that's a bit old now because it was 10 years ago, but I think still, if you have the chance to read it, it's quite short, and it's really, I think, highlighting the key concern and questions that we still have, I must say. So the first one is that how to be sure that the effect on a dimension, and that's, I think, a key point, the effect on a dimension is independent of the effect that the drug would have or would have been observed, on the broad category of the condition. So we really want to assure that we are not treating a symptom, that we have not a drug for a symptom, but we have indeed a drug that could help when, as there is no other possibilities, and indeed, the therapeutic arsenal that is currently in place is not helpful enough. So maybe it's partial response, maybe that's another dimensional, component, severity, a specific symptom, as we will see later on. But this is quite important, because otherwise, in terms, at least methodologically speaking, if you gather patients cross-cutting categories with targeting only one symptom or one cluster of symptoms, then you may end up in the end with a kind of heterogeneous population, because, okay, cognitive impairment is present in schizophrenia, is present in MDD, and they have some commonalities, but they may have also some differences. It's can we ensure that this patient, or with some specific symptoms, have exactly the same problem, issues, and there will be one drug that could, overcome those problems throughout the condition. I'm not sure we have this knowledge yet, but maybe, I can be proven wrong, or we can, which is good, but I think at least this is a question. So it's not to slow down, it's really to make sure that we don't move from one polytherapy to another one. Now, having said that, it's clear that, patients with a specific domain or specific symptoms that are not improved by traditional drugs, or maybe that in populations that can be identified by a certain type of biological aspect or parameters, can benefit from a drug and others would not. So it's not straightforward. So that's why we try to introduce in our guidelines some claims which are more dimension-based. And this is something that, again, should not be like, like an artificially narrowed indication. Should really clearly be explained and justified, substantiated by the science. I think we've heard over those days that, there are very good data that could be very useful in this respect. And we need also to target symptoms which are very much of importance for the patient. So again, it's about the clinical relevance. And when you give a traditional drug to a patient, or maybe few drugs, and then still you have residual symptoms, or you have a number of symptoms which are not improved enough, well, those are probably most likely very clinically relevant and can really prevent the patient from moving on in his life. And this is maybe a good target. So there's been a lot of discussion, and obviously from developers and company perspective, we understand it's not the same to have it in the label and have it in like later on the SMPC, in 5.1 as a description only of the results. And of course, it's not a case-by-case basis, but if the results are there, it's not something that we would, by principle, refuse. It's a case-by-case story. So recently, you may have seen that we have revised our guideline. It took a bit of while because of Brexit and business continuity plans, the relocation, pandemic. So it was frozen, but we have managed to now revise our guideline on depression, and it's been out for consultation. So now the consultation is closed, but we will have our next version also publicly available. And we tried really to emphasize specific claims. So for depression in particular, there are a number of domains that could be of interest. So we heard a lot about anhedonia and cognitive dysfunction. Of course, I think that's valid targets to explore, and they are now also in the guideline highlighted as specific domains, of interest. What is very important to again emphasize here, and I think you've understood from what I've said previously, is that really we need to understand and make sure that the effect on this domain can be demonstrated in addition to, but independently from, the improvement on the overall depressive symptoms. So really, this is something quite specific to the domain. So you're not improving the cognitive function because you're improving the depression. So it's an hypothesis that has to be tested maybe in a separate trial, and it requires also adequate endpoints and tools. And we know that tools are difficult to elaborate, and we've heard about that as well. So this is why I think it's important to have a dialogue early to make sure that before engaging into a large trial, we have an agreement on, where we are, what are the domains that could be worth, investigating, and what are the tools, what is the level of science, what do we know, and is it enough or not? What would be needed to ensure that the trial is designed in such a way that indeed we have this specificity somehow for a specific cluster of symptoms. So that's that's similar to what I've just said. So it's the idea behind the dimensional symptom in depression is really to have this dedicated study with tools that are really targeting the domain of interest. And this is what I've said. So the same for schizophrenia. So we have opened up as well the guideline on schizophrenia. Because it was the efficacy on the negative symptoms, the efficacy on cognition. So this is really something as well. We have seen recently more and more developers coming with this type of claims. I must say that we've done a survey, we've done an analysis recently, quite a long one, actually looking at the files and all of the application we have received 20 years back. So from the start of the agency till 2015, so basically 20 years. So it was approximately 100 application for CNS disorders, half in neurology and half in psychiatry. And what was really, striking is that most of the application had problems, or let's say one third in psychiatry and half in neurology had problems in the very early phase of development, so proof of concept, PK/PD, selection of patients. So it was really something recurrent, and each time you had those problems in the early phase, and you had problems in terms of efficacy and safety afterwards. So it's really important to have this discussion early, so we can ensure that we have the right population, and the dose is very important as well, the tools. But it's unfortunately happening a lot, and it's a predictor of failure in the phase 3 afterwards. So I think we heard this morning as well that it's important to go back to the basis, and that's what we have seen from our analysis as well, that quite often there is a poor evidence at the start, and there is a poor planning. So when the planning is not good enough, and it has complication afterwards, and quite often the efficacy is not there, but the clinical relevance of the finding, it's difficult also to confirm. So yes, to finish, so we have this number of tools, so I can develop, and I can also explain further afterwards. But we have a number of platform and tools that we are using, and we welcome academia, developers, and any stakeholders basically to come and discuss. So scientific advice is really to discuss any topics like preclinical, clinical, on the methodology as well of the trial. It's better if it's early. It can be a few times before the development. During this procedure, you can also try to get qualified for biomarker, for a new method, for imaging agent, imaging method. So it's something that is kind of a tool maybe afterwards to be used in the drug development program. So this is also of importance if you're planning to obviously enter a large trial afterwards. Innovation task force meetings, a few of you have already met these colleagues there. So it's also sometimes a first entry point, and you can get to explain your plan, and then be kind of orientated towards the right person internally to guide you best. Prime is really for treatment that could be of value, and that we want to help. So it's prime status is something that is quite appreciated, because you get a closer support throughout the development. And it's again something that will be appreciated, obviously, because when you come to marketing authorization later on, if you have followed the advice, and if you have been in good interaction, it's always better. Then we are all together on that, so we can agree on a number of things. And if there are difficulties or challenges, that can be discussed as well. So SME, patient communities, these are obviously something of importance, because we know for SMEs that it's difficult financially sometimes, obviously, to come or to put in place large development. And we have a number of also financial incentives for SME, and academia sometimes are forming SME or startups, and they need help from that respect as well. Patient, I put it here, but it's really key. We have a lot of interaction with patient. I think it's more and more, throughout the development program from very early phase on. So basically, from the moment you start planning your design, because as I said, I mean, clearly in psychiatry compared to other therapeutic areas, the clinical relevance is one of the most important aspects. And this is something the patient can really help as well with, because they are the one who can say what they are willing to tolerate, what they want to achieve as an improvement, what is really the symptoms that bother them the most. And it has an implication afterwards when you start planning the drug development program and you decide on your endpoints, but also afterwards with the HTA bodies, because the HTA bodies, the healthcare technology assessment bodies, will decide on the price and reimbursement. It's not EMA, it's a national competence. And they want to know, they want to be sure that this drug is really going to give something to the patient or provide something to the patient that the other drugs will not. So otherwise, there is no reason to have another drug, expensive drug, or not even if not expensive on the market. If there is already something out there, why would they, approve and reimburse another treatment? So that's also something we are. It's not in our mandate, but we have also the possibility to organize meetings with HTA bodies and companies and to discuss also inpatient and to discuss what would be really important and relevant in this field. So, we agree and we see how we can design best a trial. So, and we heard yesterday, of course, the funds that are given by the European Commission and the DG Research and IIH program. It's always good to keep an eye, obviously, on that, because openings and it may be really, as you know, helpful. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Florence, thank you very much for showing us how dynamic also your own approach has been and how much openness you have displayed to adaptation to more towards more patient profiling, for example. You said that there is an understanding of the shortcomings of the existing classification system. Of course, we also took good note of what you said later on, namely that patient populations should not be, I think the phrase was artificially narrowed. So these terms one could decode now in the discussion. We have 2 more interventions in this session. So I suggest that in line with the approach so far, we could take the questions right after those 2, unless there are burning points or questions right now. There's a burning one, Martin. Yes, please.
Many thanks. It was very interesting to see. I have a question. I was reading your new guidelines on, trying to get the picture back, new guidelines on the depression. And it says, I just want to make sure if I understand it correctly. It says efficacy in the targeted cluster of symptoms should be specific for depression and not applicable to the same clustered symptoms in other conditions. Does that mean what I think it means? Does that mean that? Does it basically means that the cognition in depression is different than the cognition in schizophrenia? Is that?
It means that, as I said, it means that we know there may be commonalities, but there may be also differences. Look, it's difficult to respond generally because it depends also on the drug. It depends on the mechanism of action of the drug. It depends on the population, exactly the subpopulation within these disorders. But what this sentence means, to my understanding, is that really we want to ensure that if you want to develop a drug or if you have a drug targeting a certain dimension in a condition, and there is a rationale to do so, surely or most likely, it's because there is a specific biological mechanism behind, And maybe it's the same as in other disorders, but maybe not, because cognition is a very vast, clinical entity, and it covers many different aspects, as we know. So maybe in schizophrenia, you don't have exactly the same type of cognitive dysfunction as in depression. Depends on the scale you use, what you want to measure. So your drug may target a certain aspect or a certain type of cognitive impairment, which is more found or observed in depression because of biological plausibility or clinical features than in other type of disorders. So I think that's what it means. I don't know if it's clearer or not.
No, I see where you're trying to get at, but it's preclude the possibility that there is homology across the disorder.
Well, it's it doesn't preclude, but it's also to, if we want to, because I think your point is more about the cross-cutting approach.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So that's something else, I must say, from perspective of the guideline. As I see, I'm not the person writing this guideline. It's a network of European experts. So I'm not, involved in the writing. I'm collaborating from EMA side, but it's a group of experts from each member state, or almost. And is to have one symptom or one cluster of symptoms throughout condition. So you want to target cognition, you want to target sleep disorder, you want to target anhedonia, you want to target something that can be found in different diagnostic criteria. So it's something that methodologically, I think it's more difficult probably, and regulatory as well, because then you will end up with a population that do not have the same primarily disorder. And the tool, we know it's difficult to develop a tool for a specific cluster of symptoms, but is it more or not more difficult to develop a tool for many disorders? And because if you want, are you sure, is it going to be feasible to develop a scale, for example, to assess cognition in different conditions? I don't know. It's quite difficult to develop a scale for anhedonia, for example. But and when you have your drug, because this is kind of already a step forward. First, I think, and that's also what we shown in our analysis of the dossier, I think what is important is to have a clinical question of interest. And it's what is it that you want to test? And what is your hypothesis? Which drug? Which indication? Which tool? So and then you can try to. I think it's more, because if you start by looking at the steps afterwards, then you have difficulties to make everything fit in your drug development program. You're like, okay, you have this idea of targeting cognition in every condition, but then what is a drug? Do we have such a drug? And do we have the scale? Do we have the endpoint? Is it the same endpoint? Because let's say maybe executive function are more impaired in one condition and maybe than other. So is it clinically relevant for the patients? Because there is this question about clinical relevance as well. Cognition is a very good target, but it's also very wide. And maybe what is clinically relevant for schizophrenic patient is not the same as for a depressed patient. And then you have enter into a drug development program, show something, but then at the end of the day, it was good in depression, but maybe not as good in schizophrenia. So I don't know,
I just wanted to make the point that you don't want to preclude something before you actually know the biology. And that's what the guidelines seem to be doing. And I think precision psychiatry is really about trying to understand the biology underlying the patient, irrespective of the current diagnostic scheme.
Yeah.
So That's my point.
Yeah, but I think that's yeah. I think thank you. No, it's obviously understood, and I think this is more like this can be done. I think through a dimensional approach. It doesn't need necessarily to be done to start with a cross-cutting approach. I think to start, but that's my very personal viewpoint here, don't quote me, but I think to start with, probably with a dimensional approach, a target on a specific patient, maybe severe patients, maybe add-on in a severe population with the one condition, it's already, and then you can enlarge and let's see, but I think personally that would be maybe a stepwise approach. There are two different angles.